A healthy community is key to economic sustainability. To thrive, we need to collectively invest in the area's built environment and the well-being of people who live there. That is the vision for Dreamland on 38th, the Cultural Wellness Center's bold and inspiring capital project in South Minneapolis. In a legacy African-American district, Dreamland was a real place where African Americans gathered, socialized, and celebrated their humanity together in community in a red-lined area of Minneapolis. Remarkably, Dreamland rose out of the ashes and the horror of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the destruction of Black Wall Street. Dreamland is part of our geography, our history, our aspirations. Since 1996, the mission of the Cultural Wellness Center has been to unleash the power of people to heal themselves and build community. As a culturally rooted African-American nonprofit, the organization has shown when culture and community knowledge are studied and valued, they are powerful tools for health, healing, community building, and economic development. Atu Mazahir is the founder and longtime executive director of the Cultural Wellness Center. For decades, she has mentored key leaders across the Twin Cities and, indeed, the world. While many of us call her Mother Atum or Elder Atum, my guest, Anthony Taylor, simply calls her Mom. Anthony, why are we here at the Midtown Global Market?
You know, the Midtown Global Market is a collaboration between NDC, Neighborhood Development Center, and the Cultural Wellness Center. It is also a really important time landmark relative to Lake Street. And I think that it has some symbolism that I think is really critically important for us to really understand Minneapolis and in some regards Minnesota.
The Cultural Wellness Center is a part owner of this great public place.
Yeah, when the global market was reestablished as a project, it was really important that the ownership also be connected to community. And so this collaboration, this ownership structure, and that matter of fact, initially there were other partners, including Latino Economic Development Corp. But really, it was established as a community catalyst that was designed to acknowledge culture as an asset and that to build entrepreneurship to really spur economic development from this perspective of culture, which is really critically important to us understanding Lake Street.
The vision of Dreamland on 38th, this cultural renewal idea, seems oddly juxtaposed to 38th Street of notorious memory as the street on which George Floyd was murdered. You have big ideas about changing the narrative while keeping the memory of the moment alive from Lake Street down to 38th in Minneapolis.
Yeah, Dreamland on 38th is actually started out as a very small development project. The Cultural Wellness Center owns a property at 38th and 3rd Avenue. And we started out really with the idea that ultimately the goal was to do some type of little mobility effort. I mean, in lay parlance, we were just going to do a cool bike shop. That was really the idea. And as we looked into the project, it turns out at one point it was a gas station, which required us to do some soil remediation. And then we really began to explore a bigger project. And as we began to think about this, really the cultural wellness approach really requires us to really think through time. And so we really began to investigate the history of the community, to really understand the impacts on those communities, to understand who has lived there, what's going on. And one of the things that we found was that 38th Street had actually had a really amazing history. That it is, I think many people know that, and maybe many people don't know, that 38th and 4th was a legacy African-American community in South Minneapolis. There was a bustling business community there. There was a growing black middle class, and all of this into the 80s and 90s. But the roots of that really were established because it was actually redlined. And there was a place where African Americans were allowed to live in South Minneapolis, and again, it grew out of that. Our definition of a cultural district or a cultural community is one where we can point to the ways, for example, it begins with redlining, relegation, or abandonment by a majority community. And when these communities move into these spaces, what they do is they immediately begin to build infrastructure, economic infrastructure, based on their culture. And when we look back far enough at 38th and 4th, what we found was an amazing human. His name is Anthony B. Cassius. And Mr. Cassius moved here from Oklahoma after the demolishment of Black Wall Street. As a teenager, he and his brother moved here. He began to work in the Twin Cities, began to work in organizing in the downtown hotels. And what he did at 38th and 4th was he opened a business called Dreamland Cafe. And this is 1937. And when you read into his autobiography, or at the Minnesota Historical Society, you can actually hear him talking about this. He immediately talks about what we now would use the parlance of a social impact business. He actually talks about opening Dreamland Cafe as a place where these young hotheads could come and conspire for the cost of a soda. And he talks about the impact of the community of this safe space. And this is 1937. And that was a monumentally seminal moment for me, because that's really what we're thinking about again today. So it made perfect sense that we would really talk about this business as Dreamland on 38th. But as I looked at it broadly, what I realized about 38th Street was that 38th also had another impact that we had don't always acknowledge, is that 35W runs perpendicular to 38th Street. Well, what happened at 38th Street is the same thing that happened in Rondo, that fundamentally 35W comes through there and bifurcates 38th Street east of the highway and 38th Street west of the highway. And if you go there today, you can stand at the location of 35W and you can look west and see prosperity and vitality, and you can look east and you will see still vacant lots. You will see less people moving on the street, less mobility, and it is an absolute result of that. And it's absolutely contrary to the way the community existed before that, where there was vitality, there were businesses on four corners, there was a record store, which we don't do anymore, barber shops, beauty salon, grocery store, social clubs. One of the markers of cultural communities that we are really clear about is the creation of social infrastructure that is really designed to do nothing more than validate the humanity of the community members who live there. And all of this existed right at 38th and 4th and along 38th Street.
Why is there such a difference between the east and west on 38th Street from the focal point of 35W?
The legacy African-American community was east of 35W. That the choice of where to put 35W had a disproportionately negative impact on the African-American community. And that was a choice. I mean, that's what we see in terms of policy. When we look at the overlay of the redlining maps from 1937, and we compare a current day map of the highway system that runs through Minneapolis, what you will see is that the highway system directly mirrors those communities that were redlined. Rondo community, North Minneapolis, South Minneapolis, Seven Corners near the University of Minnesota. And it is really, again, it's proof of the intention. And that really is what we experience. Again, that loss of economic vitality and really the demise of the African-American Economic Enterprise District that existed at 38th and 4th and south along 4th Street, even further south.
It is an ugly part of urban design history that these vibrant, often African-American heritage districts, commercial districts, become sacrifice zones. Zones of a community that were sacrificed for what the dominant culture called the greater good, but in actual terms, the powerful decided that these people, this community, just didn't count.
It really is a historical example of power and influence. I mean, and I think you're absolutely right. One, they already had the lowest property values, right? They had the lowest political agency in a community, lowest, the least influence on local government, and so absolutely that is really the case. And it's really sad, as you said, to see the national footprint of that exact reality all over this country.
Anthony, I want to be careful here. If the black community was forced to live in a confined area because of redlining and deed restrictions, this idea of recreating the vitality of the African American community on 38th can be seen as capitulating to segregation that started it. Or is it turning a negative into a positive?
What's interesting about that is I think that really what we're doing is there's an acknowledgement of the negative past that's really critical for us to understand what happened. And that does something special. And I think one of the things I think about is it actually helps the community that has gone through that experience understand that it is not them, right? That it's not their character or the choices they made, that this was really political will that was working against them. And simultaneously, what we're saying is that culture is your greatest asset. So we're really looking at what was happening there as a way that culture was really the fuel. It was the motivation. And so that we think that in this community, what we're really doing is reclaiming that legacy, kind of identifying it as an African-American legacy cultural district, because African-American people still live there, right? What we're doing is we really want to bring that knowledge forward and really turn that into intention, because that kind of collective, collaborative will, that's the legacy of that community, there's a great opportunity to do that. And it doesn't matter if all the resources are African. We really see this is a collaboration on 38th Street between Sabanthony, a legacy African-American organization, Seward Co-op, which is a white, created organization that has a commitment to social justice, collaborating with Kente Circle, which is an organization that is committed to mental health, using culture as a foundation for that, the Cultural Wellness Center. We really ultimately see this as a deep collaboration with the city of Minneapolis, because we are just a few blocks from where George Floyd was murdered. And we know that what's going to emerge there is part of this continuum, right? It's really critical and important that we understand that. And so what we know is that this area ultimately will be a destination for international social justice, racial justice pilgrims from all over the world. That's what it's become. And so now we have elevated this beyond. This is not just about, just African-American community broadly. We are saying that it is based in an African-American cultural legacy. And this is going to be a future destination for social justice pilgrims from all over the world. This is a 50, 100, 150-year vision for a way that we're going to serve the world. And that is incredibly empowering. 38th and 3rd is going to be world headquarters for the Cultural Wellness Center, but it also is going to be a place where the community will have access. I mean, we have plans for approximately a 10,000 square foot building. The main floor of that building will fundamentally be a community space where people will be able to celebrate themselves, their families, the community. And we're doing something interesting there that connects us back to the global market, where we are connected around food, and it's really food is a foundation around great culture. Is that one of the things that we saw there was that there was a disparity in terms of success, right? So first of all, cultural communities choose food in a very high amount as an entrepreneurial pursuit. It is the hardest business you can go into, okay? And entrepreneurship is already hard. At the global market, what we found was there was a disproportionate failure rate in African-American owned businesses. And our work there was beginning to support them in being more successful. And what we really found was there was some unique aspects to supporting them and offering technical assistance that was cultural, that there was something related to the legacy of being an African American in this country, to the ways that we do business, that we relate to each other, that were really important as we offered technical assistance and support and created traditional kind of financial systems, marketing systems, and all those things. Well, we learned that there. We really used this kind of cultural wellness approach in that entrepreneurship training and support. And what we want to offer here is an incubator. We really are dubbing it a co-cafe, actually, which is a co-working cafe where we will have multiple entrepreneurs. We're going to be prioritizing African-American entrepreneurs. We're going to be tying them to a culturally based support system that begins to look at their marketing, their financial support, look at shared staffing there, looking at connecting them to a network of successful cultural entrepreneurs in the food industry as well, and really allowing them to grow, to make mistakes, but continually offer the service and the love they want to offer to the community, because they go into the business for love, and but do it in a way where there's iterative growth for them, where they're getting support for that, and do it in a way where there's multiple levels of opportunity. So we really see something as simple as, for that person in the community who has just a great cookie or a great pie, we're going to have an offering of a market where they can actually sell that and make that available in the community. And then scale up a little bit. And maybe then what they'll be able to do is sell that to the food entrepreneurs that are actually anchored at Dreamland. And then those businesses, based on their growth, are going to be in different scale, because there are going to be 4 to 6 entrepreneurs at any given time there. And again, they're going to be working in a way where we're always creating an event by having them change days, share staff, share financial support, but always never be at total risk in the hardest business in the world. And because they're getting support from cultural entrepreneurs that are already in the business, that are successful, what we're doing is we're building what really matters in terms of ultimate success, particularly for cultural entrepreneurs, is relational infrastructure, right? Capital, relational capital is really foundational for support. So we really see Dreamland Co-Cafe as a place where entrepreneurs in that developmental level will be able to get those anchors of support and really increase the possibility of being successful in the toughest entrepreneurial pursuit that they could go after.
Anyone with even a passing interest in how neighborhoods come into being will note that one of the first things you see in any culture, any racial group, is a new restaurant serving food for the body and the soul. Familiar foods that say, come on in, you belong here.
Well, and again, so now we're back to Mr. Cassius's first anchoring of this, and this idea of that what if we really do think about social impact, right? And this idea of validation, like you said, what you recognize. Not only do you recognize the food, the place, and the food recognize you. There's an aspect of this that is reciprocal that we don't always aren't always clear about, and it really is a place where community comes together, but it's also where you celebrate, right? It is also anchored in really the emotional well-being. And really, cultural businesses generally are always multifaceted, right? It's not just the place where you get great food, it's where you find the best insurance program, right? It's where you find out where's the shortest line for immigration papers, right? It really is this a communal meeting place and sharing place, and again, it's really sharing from trusted sources.
Mr. Cassius also had the Nakarima Club, which you built and ran. It was a night spot. People would dress up and have an evening of entertainment and closeness, culture, community at the same time.
Well, you said food is a place that shows up in cultural communities. The other place is some place that plays music, right? And so the Nakarima Club, and for those of you who know that, Nakarima is American spelled backwards. So there's always a play on things, on the words. And the Nakarima Club actually had membership. I mean, that's what again, when I talk about social institutions. So really, it looks like a music venue, but really it's something really building social instituting, validating humanity and identity. And It's a place where you could come, but it's also a place where you could start. So again, this is where Prince and Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis, are doing music early in their career. It's a place where the community, again, is validating, again, why they live, why they exist, and also renewing itself. We talk about, it's funny, and talk to young people, and they understand healing spaces. They use that language all the time, but I don't think we often think about a music venue as that way. But it absolutely was in 1957, 1967, right? It was a place where you could go and be validated and experience healing.
If the Cultural Wellness Center is successful and has a great history of success, this really is a dream come true.
The work that the Cultural Wellness Center has done in community, really began with this very clear realization, right? Was that culture is a fundamental asset for building. And so really what we're doing is really bringing that to 38th Street. Because really it isn't just the Cultural Wellness Center. As I said, there are many, many community partners all the way down the boulevard who have been doing small pieces of this work, and many have been there for a very long time. What we're really doing, I think, is changing the narrative to one that actually acknowledges the history, the present, and the future simultaneously. Like that's the cultural wellness approach. You know what I mean? And I don't want to take credit for that. That is really the cultural wellness philosophy. And that's a very African way to see the world. You know what I mean? That idea. So I think that's really what's happening right now, is that we are really validating the history of this community, how we got here, who has lived here, their struggle, their aspirations. And because their aspirations are aligned with our aspirations for this moment and the aspirations we'll have in the future in terms of our families, ourselves, and our communities, that is an opportunity for us to see this thing where we are the past, the future, and the present come together. And that we can ride forward on that.
We've talked a good deal, and I'm struck by how little, if any, we've used the term racism. But we can't escape the fact that racism has been at the center of harm from which African Americans are being asked to recover from the trauma. For my part, let me add that there's an astonishingly large portion of the European American community who want to see racism end and to face the truth first, then begin a reconciliation. It occurs to me that there seems to be a lot of white people where this idea of Dreamland would be just the kind of idea that they would support, a healing venture, not just for African Americans, but for the damage racism has caused to them, to us.
So stay with me because I can talk too long. I mean, what I will say is that, that my mother would be proud of both of us. Particularly because we're acknowledging this idea that there are people who are now called white, right? That they also have culture. But what they have done is actually walked away from that idea of culture. And that the idea of white supremacy is the system we're talking about. That in Powderhorn, Phillips, and Lake Street may be a great example of this. And we are actually working on something that's pretty exciting. We have a group of community members who are identified as white, who are going through a project at the Cultural Wellness Center called Race to Culture. And what they have been able to do is really march into this idea of what was the culture they walked away from, right? What were the values of that? How does that show up in their life values and how they lean into family, money, land? I mean, what is that about? And what we've done that is really interesting is given that community an opportunity to do exactly what you're saying. That we started out on a project that was looking at, community investment trusts. And when we really looked at this idea of community investment trusts of resources going back in the community, the question that we asked was, well, we live in a community that has really been majority white for a very long time. This Powderhorn community right over here. That in the early days, it was outliers and hippies and, that white people, they were also a little outcast, a little on the edge, right? A little on the fringe. And they moved into this community because they could. And here they are 30 years later with more value than they thought. And how do we create a vehicle for them to invest in the community? So we worked with them and created a community investment trust where we're trying to allow them to organize the resources they have, right? Talent and money, and invest in efforts inside of the geography of our community that does prioritize Black life, that does support immigrant communities, that does support women. That this idea of those resources flowing back into the community and still prioritizing the same things that we acknowledge have been harmed. So we're prioritizing marginalized communities with the resources that those who live in the community have. We have an opportunity to do that. We have an opportunity to do that all day long. And that is really what you're describing, this idea of repairing past harms, redistributing resources to people that we know, that we can see that live in our communities. And I think it is an opportunity for us. And it would make a tremendous difference if we did more of it.
Let's continue our tour down 38th in Chicago. What will we see? And let us in on the vision for the new world headquarters of the Cultural Wellness Center.
Well, 38th, so we started Lake in Chicago, and you can see the vitality on Lake Street. Lake Street was really a transportation thoroughfare. Chicago is also a major north-south thoroughfare. So that 5 bus line on Chicago is full of people. It's you can get out to Mall of America there, and you can get out to Brookdale on the 5, right? It's an amazing bus line. That what is happening as we drive away from Lake Street, though, and one of the things that we've started to look at and think about in terms of the data is looking at the ways communities change in smaller increments. 3 blocks, 6 blocks, 9 blocks, 12 blocks. We want to look at it that way. So as we walk south, we leave the vitality of Lake Street, and we have a little bit of, near Lake Street, you have a little, not a lot of homes, right? But you have a church, you've got, a business here. This is at 31st. You go one more block, and what you now start to see is a little more residential community. But the way that when we look inside of who lives there, what we find is that in terms of those quality of life measures, median household income is actually the lowest close to Lake Street, is the lowest when you live close to Lake Street. So this again represents something, right? So you go a little further down, just to 36th Street, and what we see is more homes. Pillsbury Theater is right here, and the median household income goes up just a little. It goes up maybe $3,000. So at Lake Street, we're looking at median income of roughly $30,000. That's less than 50% of the area mean income in the Twin Cities. You get to 38th Street, and on this drive where we're walking now, and we pass the Pillsbury, we come into George Floyd Square, and you immediately feel something. As you're walking, you're going to see all the names of African-American people that have been killed by police in the street. That this location has become an expression of all that pain, of all that trauma that community members experienced in those times. You walk a little further and you come to really the first place where you start to see the area where George Floyd's murder is like marked off. On your right is a small coffee shop that has been turned over a couple times, but is now black owned. Wing Young Huey's studio is there. So there again, the arts community is here. On your left, is the theater. And you are standing right smack dab in the spot where George Floyd was murdered. And you're standing in front of Cub Foods. And when people come here, it is amazing that so many people around the world have seen that image and cannot believe that they're standing there now. The Speedway that is now dubbed the People's Way is on your right. And you look around, and what you have to realize is you see this metal fist in the intersection of the corner. And I am always reminding people, this was an organic community response. This was not organized. This was not an arts organization or an installation. This was an organic community response to carve this space off and to build this fist, this metal fist in the intersection. To begin the flowers, of course, the flowers began to come in on a daily basis. And immediately, again, the artists go to work. Community members organize themselves and start curating, dating, and saving the mementos of love that are left for George Floyd. I mean, it's just this community response, right, is really, and I have to say overwhelming, because I was there the next day, and every day you see the infrastructure building. And as I'm standing here today, what I realize is we are standing at, again, a site that will become an international destination for social justice pilgrims from all over the world. And this was inspired by the community. When we walk a block west and we take a right, we come across another amazing experience called Say Their Name Cemetery. And again, this is an organic community response. Two young women started, and they created headstones of the 100+ people that have been killed in police violence, police interactions. And they put the name, the date they died, when they were born, and the age which they were killed. And that, looking through this, it is the most emotional experience that I've had at an installation.
You have a rather unique way of looking at those tombstones at that cemetery.
Yeah, all the credit to my mother and the Cultural Wellness Center is that they, through their work with doulas and babies and looking at birthing, they came up with rather than looking at average age of death or life expectancy, they came up with a number that they call years of potential life lost. And we calculated the years of potential life lost for the people who died there. And it was about 4,300 years of potential life. And again, we frame it in that regard to go, what could we create with 4,000 years of life? What could we discover? What disease could we cure?
All the ideas.
What music could we make? What art could we create with 4,000 years of life?
Who are these people going to become?
Who are these people going to become? What contribution will they make? And it is a way for us to really not just grieve their loss of life, but to grieve our loss of opportunity. It is a collective experience that we have to have every time we see something like this, every time we see a community member lost in any form of violence, that we have a collective loss.
It seems like the intersections on 38th Street and the major cross streets are barren of activity. Most vibrant communities and neighborhoods are anchored on all four corners by businesses: beauty parlor, a hardware store, restaurant, barbershop, small businesses, sometimes large. Those corners were once bustling in the days of Mr. Cassius. Where's it gone?
Yeah, it's something, and I think it didn't really, I bike, as you people know, so I'm all over the city, and what I noticed this in African American communities, and I noticed it here, and now I test this theory, is that at some point there's this response from municipalities where they will either take a corner out, right? And I think that urban planners talk about setbacks and how horrible those are for business on corner and Vitality, but there's going down 38th Street, you see this place where either corners are totally taken out or businesses set in, so there's a big setback, so there's no energy on the corner, no life on the corner. When you go down to 38th and 4th, that was the old business district, the center of the economic vitality. Two of the corners was taken out. One became a church. The other one became, again, a social service agency. And so what happens is you lose the vitality of that. You also lose the potential regeneration of that. Because for those of us who know 38th Street, if you go down 38th Street, where the corners are intact, not at 4th, not at 3rd, not at 1st. You got 35W, but then at Nicollet, all four corners are intact. And what you have is energetic vitality for those corners. And then you go down to Bryant Avenue, and those corners are intact, and there's vitality. You go down to Lindale Avenue. What you see is this regeneration of business and opportunity that comes with the ability to turn those old retail locations into new retail locations, right? You see the same thing going east, down Bloomington, down Cedar, down 28th. I mean, it is something that we see all the time. And so I think, again, we think about things that have happened in ways that cities have responded to uprising or challenge. And again, we wind up with this situation where, keeping the ability for it to regenerate is a challenge.
Is there anything else you want to hit on that I failed to ask?
I think the biggest thing, always is that Lake Street has always been a place where people move for opportunity. And I think that is something that I really do believe to be the case. People moved here for opportunity. That it is the highest aspiration for communities is really opportunity. Mobility in the fact that they can chart their lives, that they can create for the future. When we talk to community, and we did a lot of conversations on Lake Street, the number one aspiration that people had was always for their children. It was never for now, and I just find that fundamentally amazing that when every community we talked to was looking at moving here for opportunity to create mobility for their children. And so communities are always thinking multi-generationally. I think that we think that is not the case. I think that people believe that, but no, every community we talk to, every cultural community, every economic community, every part of the corridor, everyone really talked about this idea of opportunity and multi-generational planning and what they were going to do. And I do believe that we are at a moment where we have to create new solutions, that we do have to do exactly what you were describing earlier, is really understand the real, not just economic cost of racism, but the spiritual cost of racism. to us all, and that we can begin to move forward in a way that does create opportunities for all communities to heal. There's some healing for us all to do. And again, this is our work together to move through this. So I think that those motivations and those intentions set us on a course for a vital future.
Thank you for that. I want to close with this question. I'm enthused by your vision, a vision that I would call healing for all sides in the race divide. And the Cultural Wellness Center has always been about healing mind, body, spirit. And it's right there in the name, wellness, the wellness of people and community and culture. I think it's important to talk about the work of Atum Azahir and all that she has done over the past 25 years, partnerships with Alina, developing programs for young and elders alike. It's an amazing body of work.
You know, you're absolutely right. And the foundation of that work was really related to healthcare and healing. I think that's the part that is really quite amazing. And you know, something that is interesting is that if we think about the Backyard Initiative, which was that original partnership between Alina and the Cultural Wellness Center, the Backyard Initiative in some regard was really Alina saying, we're going to be a good neighbor in our own backyard. Right, we're gonna look at our own backyard and see how we can make a difference. What is the role we play? What is the harm that we've done? What is the investment we're going to make? How do we bring our resources to bear to create a more vital future for our own backyard? And out of that came some amazing work. I think that one of those amazing pieces of work was this work where the Cultural Wellness Center was able to support the city of Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota to change their definition of health to be more in line with the World Health Organization's definition of health, which, summing it up, simply, is that the greatest measure of health is connectedness. That isolation, segregation, right, is a detriment to health and well-being, and that many of the strategies that have been used over time, right, with marginalized community has been isolation, segregation, those things. That the Cultural Wellness Center always had an intersectional approach to what was well-being, right? But at the foundation of that was culture as an organizing and validating principle that connected people to others, right? That idea of connectedness again always plays up there. That it was intersectional and that it wasn't about avoiding disease. That it incorporated someone's housing and incorporated their relationships and their educational strategies and their economics. But it also, again, reached out and talked about their connection to family and those that they love. And in the end, food was not for just filling and nourishment and kind of those molecules of nutrients, that food itself was healing. Food was medicine. So developing a nutritional strategy that now has emerged as culinary heritage, opening a new business that is looking at the idea of culinary heritage based on the 5 ancient grains that are indigenous to Africa, and looking at this idea with culinary heritage. What we're doing is we're hoping to invite cultural chefs from around the world. And in Minneapolis, they all live here, so we don't have to go far. We can invite chefs from all over the world right down the street. And rather than us look at food as cultural food as what's cultural for African Americans is soul food, so it's grits and greens. What's cultural for people that are Latinx or from Mexico, wherever you want to pick in that part of the world, is tacos and tostada. That's not it. That what is cultural for African people, East African, West African, Iranian, Israeli, what's cultural are the techniques that they use, which evolve out of their early cultural communities. It is the spices that are indigenous to where they live and when they cook, and the ways, the size, right, of food and what we do that's cultural. So what we're asking them to do is bring those techniques and those spices and those ways of serving and savoring and use these 5 ancient grains, and let's cook cultural food Bring your culinary heritage to these ingredients and let's create together. And it will be healthy. That's the other thing, is that we're not going, there's health food and not health food. When you prepare from this culinary heritage perspective, within the ancient grains framework, and it is prepared with love and served in community, the food is healthy, right? You eat less when you are fed emotionally in a meal. So we really are, again, bringing ritual, not just to the preparation, but ritual to the consumption of the meal, that is what's nourishing, that is what's nurturing, and that is fundamentally why we need to eat.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for your time. And thank you for joining us. I'm Don Shelby, and we hope you'll be part of the dream